It's sold for decades as a goofy college comedy.
Be the most important thing in a man's life, huh? You know, that cheerleader set us up.
But Revenge of the Nerds hides a much darker story than most people remember. Behind the cheap laughs are real campuses, real humiliation experiments, bizarre behind-the-scenes secrets, and pranks that, today, would probably land people in court instead of a fraternity house. This isn't just teen nostalgia. It's a movie that accidentally predicted the rise of nerd culture while repeating the very cruelty it claimed to fight. In this video, we're diving into 17 strange, hidden truths that will completely change the way you watch Revenge of the Nerds, 1984. So if you're ready to see this cult classic with new eyes, hit like, subscribe to the channel, and let's jump straight into part 1.
Do you want to dance?
Okay.
Part 1. The rebellious seed inside one word. Nerd. From the very first spark of the idea, the story carried a constant split in its nature. Wanting to defend the weak while being tempted by cheap laughs aimed right at them. In studio meetings, nerd was still a word used for mockery, not celebration.
Place to live. It's okay I leave early?
No. The central figure, a silhouette of a skinny, computer-obsessed student, was built like a mirror for every stockpiled humiliation from high school. Being teased, labeled weird, pushed out of the mainframe of normal life. That feeling of being despised, repeated over and over in the script and in the atmosphere behind the scenes, became the engine for the entire revenge journey, but also planted a question. If all that happens is swapping who mocks and who gets mocked, does the wound ever really heal? Part 2. A fictional college wearing the real face of Arizona Adams College on screen actually wears the face of the University of Arizona in Tucson, with real dorms, gyms, and fountains sitting in the dry desert heat.
Different already. Like, more mature.
Yeah.
At first, the administration refused to let the crew shoot there, afraid that the raunchy tone would damage the school's reputation, as if the campus itself feared being labeled odd in front of the whole country. After rounds of negotiation, they agreed on the condition that more questionable scenes be toned down, a polite compromise that clashed directly with a script full of cruel pranks. When the marginalized figure walks across the quad, dodging the contemptuous stares of the jocks, that sense of being pushed away isn't just fiction. It rests on concrete, doors, and windows that are completely real, in a place where, off-camera, the school itself hesitated over its new image. Part 3. A small budget and the price of bitter laughter. With a budget of only a few $1 million, low for a theatrical release at the time,
Old MacDonald had a farm, E-I-E.
The production had to gamble on a fast, punchy style of comedy built on shock value and sharp-edged satire. The central character is never given long, quiet psychological scenes, but is constantly thrown into naked humiliations. Housing taken away, belongings destroyed, dignity crushed. Every humiliation is sugar-coated by the roar of audience laughter, blurring the line between empathy and complicity. The invisible pressure of box office numbers pushes this story about the marginalized into selling its own shame in exchange for tickets. The sound of laughter from the seats echoes every real-life mockery, turning that journey toward freedom into something shadowed by exploitation. Part 4. The nerd laugh, born from an awkward moment. One of the strangest behind-the-scenes details is how the iconic nerd laugh was created. The actor playing the father tried several different laughs, and finally let out a broken, stuttering chuckle that sounded like an attempt to swallow down his own embarrassment. The crew loved it so much they kept it and turned it into a recurring signature. On screen, when the father imitates that laugh, the distance between generations, between someone who once endured mockery and someone now continuing that chain, suddenly feels blurry. For the central figure, a single sound becomes the moment where a private, shameful quirk is blown up into a branded entertainment bit. Every time that laugh returns, it acts like a callback, reminding the audience of a pattern. Private pain always risks being turned into a product for others to enjoy. Part 5. Real-world testing, when makeup becomes a real mask. To test how convincing the look would be, the two leads were put into full nerd makeup and wardrobe, then sent to wander around a real college campus where nobody knew filming was involved. The reactions matched the script perfectly. Staring eyes, giggles behind their backs, unconscious avoidance in the hallways. The shape of the marginalized character in that moment is no longer a screenwriter's invention. It is the direct result of a society used to sorting and pushing certain people to the edges. The actors later described the experience like a small but deep cut. Even knowing they were just acting, the feeling of being looked down on left a stain that didn't wash off easily. In the film, every time the nerds are mocked, the echo of that experiment quietly returns, hinting that this isn't just a joke contained within a movie. Part 6. Freemasons and the Hidden Chamber of Judgment. Those Greek council scenes, where pranks are judged and punished, were not shot in a standard student conference room, but in a local Masonic hall. The older man who escorts the nerds into the chamber is actually the building's caretaker, not a professional actor. The old wooden floor, faint symbols on the walls, and strange angles of light falling across the chairs had existed for decades before the film, giving each judgment scene a ritualistic weight. Every time the marginalized group is called up to answer for their actions, the room seems to seal shut, evoking the shadow of invisible power structures that brand and punish anyone who doesn't fit. That small set detail becomes another symbolic layer. Even the space itself appears to side with the old order, making the fight for fairness feel even heavier. Part 7. The white powder in the dressing room and a sense of lost control. During filming, an off-duty police officer working security found a small vial of white powder in the dressing room, suspected to be an illegal substance. No one ever knew whose it was, no investigation reached a conclusion, and the matter quietly disappeared. This detail, never shown on screen, still mirrors the chaos in the air. The borderline between controlled rebellion and outright loss of control was thinner than anyone wanted to admit. While the marginalized character in the story struggles to reclaim autonomy from the sports fraternity, the reality behind the scenes shows how the grown-up world often shrugs at the behavior of those in power. The contrast becomes a subtle callback. The system is always quick to overlook the wrongdoing of the strong, yet demands absolute cleanliness and obedience from the weak. Part 8. Compromise with the university and a two-sided mirror. To film on campus, the crew agreed with the University of Arizona that nothing morally questionable would be shot on school grounds, and that student groups would be listened to. Yet on paper, the movie still relies heavily on cruel pranks, invasions of privacy, and public humiliation as the backbone of its comedy. The gap between the polite promise and the finished content forms a perfect two-sided mirror. On one side, a respectable facade. On the other, a flow of behavior that recreates the very cruelty the story claims to criticize. The marginalized figure stands between those two reflections, celebrated in the finale while being used to maintain the old entertainment model. Each time the character is pulled into another extreme prank, the theme of revenge drags along the dark shadow of complicity. Part 9. A finale that almost became a storm of violence. Producers had to fight to keep the current ending, where the nerds step onto the pep rally stage and flip the power dynamic with words and solidarity, instead of an alternative, more violent finale that would have totally destroyed the jock's house. They wanted a resolution closer in spirit to Gandhi's nonviolence, so the marginalized group would not become a new version of the tormentors who hurt them in the first place. That moment when the despised group stands tall on stage, calling people of all eras to stand with the nerds, became a symbolic image. Yet this choice also brings back another callback. Throughout the film, the nerds flirt repeatedly with crossing the line and using vicious pranks as payback. The peaceful ending does not erase those cracks. It simply covers them for a moment. Part 10. Jokes that cross the line and a modern point of view. Years later, as older viewers watched again, many scenes once framed as harmless fun were seen very differently. Invasions of private spaces, pranks using bodies and boundaries, moments that turn other people into objects on display. Stripped of bouncy music, several of these bits look alarmingly like patterns of real-world harm, even when committed by former victims. The marginalized character is caught between two bad options: keep enduring abuse, or become a source of harm in order to feel powerful. The story leans on the second route in more than a few scenes, so the original pain is not soothed, it is simply redirected. The callback to that initial contempt reappears, now not only from the jock side, but from within the once-oppressed group itself. Part 11, Split-Screen Press and a Branching Inner Life. From release day, critics' reactions were sharply divided. Some major outlets pointed to the film's treatment of women, its use of people of color and other marginalized groups as laugh material, and called it a story that preaches tolerance on top of a foundation of stereotypes. At the same time, many young viewers felt seen for the first time. There, on screen, were feelings of being hated, failing to fit, and the small joy of finally winning once. The marginalized figure is pulled in two directions. On one side, the genuine empathy of those who were mocked. On the other, the cold, analytical gaze of a later era. This split generates a tangled inner life. Gratitude for representation mixed with the uncomfortable realization that this same story may be hurting others. Part 12. When Lambda 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 stepped into real life, few expected Lambda Lambda Lambda, portrayed in the movie as a black fraternity willing to open its doors to the despised, to become a real organization later, with chapters in several states. The real-world version did not lock itself into a single ethnic group, but welcomed many kinds of members, intentionally trying not to repeat the very stereotypes the fictional version helped solidify. The fact that a satirical symbol turned into an actual refuge is a strange, hopeful irony. The marginalized character, once a pure invention, now has a real-world house to return to. This is one of the rare callbacks that feels healing. A model originally used for laughs is reclaimed and rebuilt into a support system for those still feeling out of place on college campuses. Part 13. From Insult to Badge of Power. One screenwriter once suggested that pop culture's shift toward honoring nerds really began with that final scene, when the marginalized figure no longer begs to be accepted but stands tall, introduces the group proudly, and invites others to claim the label. In that moment, the word nerd, once shorthand for someone exiled from the social circle, suddenly becomes a banner to lift high. People who used to fear the label quietly start thinking that maybe being seen as passionate, smart, and different isn't so bad. Yet the memory of old humiliations doesn't vanish. It transforms into motivation and, at times, a weapon. This creates a paradox inside. The new identity is both armor and scar, reminding everyone that beneath the cheering crowd lies a past of contempt no slogan can erase. Part 14. Steps, pools, and dorms that still hold the shadow of exclusion. Cochise Hall, Bear Down Gymnasium, the walkways around the fountain. These real locations later became pilgrimage sites for fans who wanted to stand where the nerds were kicked out of their dorm and forced to sleep in the gym. The same steps where a character is shoved, the same pool where a gentle friend is tossed into the water, can all be found on maps of Tucson. Tourists smiling for photos there creates an odd sensation. One space is tied both to a fantasy of humiliation and to loud, cheerful memories of generations of actual students. The callback to being pushed out of home is no longer confined to the film. It is carved into stone and concrete, carrying the story of the marginalized beyond the movie screen. Part 15. Silly continuity errors and the clumsy nature of nerd life. Lists of goofs note countless mistakes, props disappearing between shots, drinks shifting position, broken items magically repaired, technical details not matching the dialogue. Instead of annoying viewers, these slip-ups oddly fit the spirit of the story. The world of Outcasts rarely runs smoothly, and something always feels off by everyday standards. The marginalized character lives in a universe where everything, experiments, friendships, plans, can jump off track without warning. The film's little errors become an outer reflection of that sense of misalignment. Not perfect, but oddly honest. The callback to clumsiness, then, doesn't just show up in awkward posture or social misfires, it's built right into the visual fabric around the character. Part 16. When lawyers and critics turn teen nostalgia into an indictment. In recent years, lawyers and critics have carefully listed the film's actions one by one. Break-ins, property damage, privacy invasions, body-related pranks, and pointed out that in real life, each could lead to charges. A story once treated as rowdy teen nostalgia is now examined under the cold light of the law. The marginalized figure, once framed as a pitiable victim, now must face the reality that many revenge tactics cross into actual harm. This new awareness creates another layer of inner conflict. Pride in having fought back tangled with a vague sense of regret for reproducing the very power structure that caused so much suffering. The callback to repeated negative behavior shifts tone, from laughter to an uneasy pause. Part 17. A double-edged legacy and a nameless confusion. Today, the story is remembered both as a milestone that brought nerd culture into the open and as a symbol of a time that still did not understand consent, respect, and diversity. The shape of the marginalized character stands between two currents: gratitude for a film that dared to say the despised deserve the spotlight, and confusion at realizing that protection was built on methods that could hurt others. Callbacks to contempt, cruel pranks, and flipped power dynamics run throughout, reminding everyone that every act of revenge carries the risk of repeating old patterns. Perhaps that dual nature, both liberating and troubling, is the strangest mystery of all. The inner world of the marginalized figure does not stop at victory, but keeps wrestling with itself long after the final credits roll.